To Build a Fire by Jack London. Read by Ari Ryan. Day had broken cold and gray, exceedingly cold and gray, when the man turned aside from the main Yukon Trail and climbed the high earth bank, where a dim and little-traveled trail led eastward through the fat spruce timberland. It was a steep bank, and he paused for breath at the top, excusing the act to himself by looking at his watch. It was 9 o'clock. There was no sun, nor hint of sun, though there was not a cloud in the sky. It was a clear day, and yet there seemed an intangible pall over the face of things, a subtle gloom that made the day dark, and that was due to the absence of sun. This fact did not worry the man. He was used to the lack of sun. It had been days since he had seen the sun, and he knew that a few more days must pass before the cheerful orb, due south, would just peep above the skyline and dip immediately from view. The man flung a look back along the way he had come. The Yukon lay a mile wide and hidden under 3 feet of ice. On top of this ice were as many feet of snow. It was all pure white, rolling in gentle undulations where the ice jams of the freeze-up had formed. North and south, as far as his eye could see, it was unbroken white, save for a dark hairline that curved and twisted from around the spruce-covered island to the south, and that curved and twisted away into the north, where it disappeared behind another spruce-covered island. This dark hairline was the trail, the main trail that led south 500 miles to the Chilkoot Pass, Dyea, and Saltwater, and that led north 70 miles to Dawson, and still on to the north 1,000 miles to Nulato, and finally to St. Michael on the Bering Sea, 1,000 miles and 500 more. But all this, the mysterious, far-reaching hairline trail, the absence of sun from the sky, the tremendous cold and the strangeness and weirdness of it all, made no impression on the man. It was not because he was long used to it. He was a newcomer to the land, a Chechako, and this was his first winter. The trouble with him was that he was without imagination. He was quick and alert in the things of life, but only in the things, and not in the significances. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. 50 degrees below zero meant 80-odd degrees of frost. Such fact impressed him as being cold and uncomfortable, and that was all. It did not lead him to meditate upon his frailty as a creature of temperature, and upon man's frailty in general, able only to live within certain narrow limits of heat and cold, and from there on it did not lead him to the conjectural field of immortality and man's place in the universe. 50 degrees below zero stood for a bit of frost that hurt and that must be guarded against by the use of mittens, ear flaps, moccasins, warm moccasins, and thick socks. 50 degrees below zero to him was just precisely 50 degrees below zero. 50 degrees below zero to him was just precisely 50 degrees below zero. That there should be anything more to it than that was a thought that never entered his head. As he turned to go on, he spat speculatively. There was a sharp, explosive crackle that startled him. He spat again, and again in the air before it could fall to the snow, the spittle crackled. He knew that a 50 below spittle crackled in the snow. But this spittle had crackled in the air. Undoubtedly it was colder than 50 below. How much colder he did not know. But the temperature did not matter. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come over across the divide from the Indian Creek country, while he had come the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting out logs in the spring from the islands in the Yukon. He was bound for the old claim on the left fork of the Henderson Creek, where the boys were already. They had come over across the divide from the Indian Creek country, while he had come the roundabout way to take a look at the possibilities of getting out logs in the spring from the islands inside the Yukon. logs in the spring from the islands in the Yukon. He would be into camp by 6 o'clock, a bit after dark. It was true, the boys would be there, a fire would be going, and a hot supper would be ready. As for lunch, he pressed his hand against the protruding bundle under his jacket. It was also under his shirt, wrapped in a handkerchief and lying against the naked skin. It was the only way to keep the biscuits from freezing. He smiled agreeably to himself as he thought of those biscuits, each cut open and sopped in bacon grease, and each enclosing a generous slice of fried bacon. He plunged in among the big spruce trees. The trail was faint, a foot of snow had fallen since the last sled had passed over, and he was glad he was without a sled, traveling light. In fact, he carried nothing but the lunch wrapped in the handkerchief. He was surprised, however, at the cold. It certainly was cold, he concluded, as he rubbed his numb nose and cheekbones with his mittened hand. He was a warm-whiskered man, but the hair on his face did not protect the high cheekbones and eager nose that thrust itself aggressively into the frosty air. At the man's heels trotted a dog, a big native husky, the proper wolf dog, gray-coated and without any visible or temperamental difference from its brother, the wild wolf. The animal was depressed by the tremendous cold. It knew that it was no time for traveling. It knew that it was no time for traveling. Its instinct told it a truer tale than what was told by the man. Its instinct told a truer tale than was told to the man by the man's judgment. In reality, it was not merely colder than 50 below zero. It was colder than 60 below, than 70 below. It was 75 below zero. Since the freezing point is 32 above zero, it meant that the 107 degrees of frost obtained. The dog did not know anything about thermometers. Possibly in its brain there was no sharp consciousness or condition of very cold such as was in the man's brain. But the brute had its instinct. It experienced a vague but menacing apprehension that subdued it and made it slink along the man's heels, and that made it question eagerly every unwanted movement of the man, as if expecting him to go into camp or to seek shelter. Somewhere and build a fire. The dog had learned fire, and it wanted fire, or else to burrow under the snow and cuddle its warmth away from the air. The frozen moisture of its breathing had settled on its fur in a fine powder of frost, and especially where its jowls, muzzle, eyelashes widened by its crystalled breath. The man's red beard and mustache were likewise frosted, but more solidly, the deposit taking the form of ice and increasing with every warm, moist breath he exhaled. Also, the man was chewing tobacco, and the muzzle of ice held his lips so rigidly that he was unable to clear his chin when he expelled the juice. The result was that a crystal beard, the color and solidity of amber, was increasing its length on his chin. It fell down. If he fell down, it would shatter itself like glass into brittle fragments. But he did not mind the appendage. It was the penalty of all tobacco chewers paid in that country, and he had been out before in 2 cold snaps. They had not been so cold as this, he knew, but the spirit thermometer at 60 mile, he knew they had been registered at 50 below and at 55. He led on through the level stretch of woods for several miles, crossed the wide flat of Niggerheads, and dropped down a bank to the frozen bed of a small stretch. This was the Henderson Creek, and he knew it was 10 miles from the Forks. He looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock. He was making 4 miles to an hour, and he calculated that he would arrive at the Forks 12:30. He decided to celebrate that event by eating his lunch there. The dog dropped it again at his heels. The dog dropped in again at his heels with a tail drooping discouragement, and as the man swung along the creek bed. The furrow of the old sled trail was plainly visible, but a dozen inches of snow covered the marks of the last runners. In a month no man had come up or down the silent creek. The man held steadily on. He was not much given to thinking, and just then particularly he had nothing to think about save that he would eat lunch at the Forks and that at 6 o'clock he would be in camp with the boys. There was nobody to talk to, and had there been, speech would have been impossible because of the ice muzzle on his mouth. So he continued monotonously to chew tobacco and to increase the length of his amber beard. Once in a while the thought reiterated itself that it was very cold and that he had never experienced such cold. As he walked along, he rubbed his cheekbones and nose with the back of his mittened hand. He did this automatically, now and again changing hands. But rub as he would, the instant he stopped, his cheekbones went numb, and the following instant the end of his nose went numb. He was sure to frost his cheeks, but he knew that, and experienced a pang of regret that he had not devised a nose strap of the sort Bud wore in cold snaps. Such a strap passed across the cheeks as well and saved them, but it didn't matter much after all. What were frosted cheeks? A bit painful, that was all. They were never serious. Empty as the man's mind was of thoughts, he was keenly observant, and he noticed the changes in the creek, the curves and bends and timber jams, and always he sharply noted where he placed his feet. Once, coming around a bend, he shied abruptly like a startled horse. Like a startled horse, curved away from the place where he had been walking, and retreated several paces back along the trail.